Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, along with CBS Sports draft analyst Chris Trapasso. And Chris, we are shockingly not going to start the show by talking about quarterbacks. And I know that this is stunning news and people may be upset. But there's actually some other things to talk about, as the Minnesota Vikings have reportedly brought in 4 players, and I'm sure more than that, but 4 very notable first round potential prospects in their 30 visits, where you are allowed to bring in 30 players to visit your facility. And 4 of them are guys that have been talked about quite a bit in the first round. So here's what I want to do. I want to start the show by having you break these players down, because I have spent most of my life focused solely on quarterbacks. So I am somewhat familiar with these players, but not at the level that you are studying the entire draft. So the first guy I have name dropped, 57 times on the show as an option at 11 if the Vikings don't pick a quarterback, which would be Byron Murphy. A defensive tackle whose tape I've looked at and really liked, and whose numbers I've looked at and really liked. And it seems that the Vikings at least have him in potential plans if they do not draft quarterback, say number 3 overall, by trading up. So what do we need to know about the defensive tackle Byron Murphy out of Texas?
He is my interior defensive lineman number 1 in this class. It's really a 2-horse race between he and Johnny Newton at Illinois, who didn't actually work out during the pre-draft process. With Byron Murphy, to me, he is the interior defensive lineman that is worth picking like as high as 11. Like there's the Tavondre Sweat, his teammate, that's a big nose tackle. And it's really hard for me to be convinced that unless you're getting a premier pass rusher at defensive tackle, I would almost say picking him anywhere in the first round, you might as well not do it. Byron Murphy, the last 2 years, pressure generation rate over or right around 11%. And I think that's a big number. That's first round caliber. Anywhere or anytime you're between 8, 9, get up there into double digits, playing a lot of snaps at defensive tackle, that is first round caliber. So he checks that box. What I like about Byron Murphy, despite being, I don't want to call him undersized, because I think he's exactly the right size, right around 300 pounds that you want at that 3 technique that's just going to get up the field. He's also good against the run. There were some clips, I feel like Lance Zierlein tweeted him recently about how good he is, literally like dropping down to one knee against a double team, or when he's facing a bigger, stronger guard or a center. Byron Murphy will literally be the lowest man on the field almost and kind of stand his ground, or as they use kind of in the scouting world, he'll grow roots against double teams or against powerful players. Now, he's not someone that is going to keep your linebackers free. He wants to get up the field, elite level explosiveness. Pass rush move arsenal is not amazing, but he definitely isn't complacent with his hands. So again, this is weird for us to not be talking about how are the Vikings trading up for a quarterback, but in some weird scenario where that doesn't happen and they just can't get the quarterback, because there is a need there, I think, at defensive tackle, especially someone who can get after the quarterback. Byron Murphy is better than anyone at doing that in this class at defensive tackle.
And as far as all the numbers go, he checks the boxes. He was graded 91 something by PFF and had terrific pressure numbers. Sack numbers were not insane, but they were still pretty solid for somebody in his position. And I think that the defensive tackle position is growing in importance in the NFL, because a lot of teams are playing lighter behind the defensive line. So you do have to do exactly what you're talking about, stuff the run with guys who are playing in the interior, but also there's a lot of decent tackles in the league. I don't think there's a lot of good guards in the NFL. I think there's a handful of them. And if you have those Kenny Clark, what Akeem Hicks was a few years back, those destroyers in the middle, or even if it's an undersized guy like a Grady Jarrett, Aaron Donald's the all-time example, shouldn't compare him to anyone, but you see the impact on a play-to-play basis. And the Vikings have been on the other side of this quite a bit with Kirk Cousins, where that was his number one kryptonite, I think, is when you could blow through the middle. And we've seen, Garrett Bradbury get blown up. We've seen the guards struggle against these great defensive tackles, but the Vikings have not been on the right side of that for actually a couple years since Linval Joseph left. And he's not a Linval Joseph-like, but I think as an impact player, this is somebody that you could see eventually getting one of those $20 million a year contracts. Yep. I guess my question is, as they have him come visit, Is it 11 or you're not getting him for Byron Murphy II?
I think he could be there at 23. Just from looking at other mock drafts, seeing some consensus big boards, it wouldn't be shocking. And it does kind of seem like, in talking to a few people that I know around the league, that a lot of NFL coaches really like Johnny Newton, the other kind of up the field, elite level pass rusher on the inside in this class. But I think, again, being at Texas, seeing how that program has really ascended the last couple of years, he was kind of the key cog, doing everything that you just mentioned, like creating havoc in the Big 12, getting to the college football playoff, the elite testing numbers, the production. I would be surprised if he was there at 23, but I don't think it's like, hey, this is like Malik Neighbors is not going to get there to 23. Like there is a possibility where he could be available, at least within striking distance. But if the Vikings want him in this, alternate universe where they're not picking a quarterback, probably would have to do it at 11, because like you're saying, these type of 6 to 10 to 12 sack, 60 to 70 pressure interior defensive linemen are very hard to come by, and they are getting a lot of money. So I think teams understand that we're not going to pick the run stuffer in the first round, but if we can get an Ed Oliver even, I think that they would be completely fine with that. So it feels like 11 or bust if they want to draft Byron Murphy.
Even if you have somebody that only plays 500 to 600 snaps, but impacts the pass rush on the interior, that's a very valuable player. I mean, everybody wants the Dexter Lawrence, who's 340 pounds and can somehow rush the passer and can stuff the run. Okay, there's not that many of those guys, but if you become an impact player over 600 snaps, and the Vikings have a couple other guys that, Harrison Phillips is a reasonable player. They brought in Jerry Tillery, who's just started to show some signs, Jonah Williams, but they really could use another person on the interior to make a difference. Now there's 3 other guys that came in to visit, and one of them, I really like his production numbers. They're kind of through the roof, and that is Latu out of UCLA. And he was talked about as a guy who did not have the crazy physical freak skills, but is more of an excellent technician at the position. And you see that in his production. And this is somebody that you could see going quickly after all the run on wide receivers and quarterbacks. But I also think that it's not totally crazy to see him in the middle, late part of the first round. So what's the breakdown on Latu?
Yeah, so just to your point on where he could be picked, I'll start there. That he's kind of enigmatic in this draft. That you watch the film and you're like, this guy's the top half of the first round pick all day. 20% career pressure creation rate, which is like Micah Parsons level. It's really, really high. But he's an older prospect. At his size, he's like 6'4", 260. So he has an NFL build, kind of a little bit high cut. He's older. He has shorter arms, and he has an injury history. So there could be a few of those teams picking from anywhere from the Bears at 9 all the way to when the Vikings have their second pick at 23. If there's 3 or 4 of those teams that either have removed him from their boards, which I don't think teams would necessarily take him completely off. It's not that bad in terms of his injury history, but they could move him down a little bit. Then suddenly, all of a sudden, he's there at 23 overall. In terms of the book on him, what you explained was pretty much spot on. That in terms of pass rush moves, swim move, swipe move, cross chop, anything that you hear about a name for a pass rush move, Latu has that in the arsenal. And I remember thinking that he was going to come out last year because he looked like this super fluid athlete that even as a junior had all of these pass rush moves in the arsenal ready to go and deployed them in the Pac-12 and was super productive. He comes back and pretty much has the same season. So to me, I'm a big believer. Like, you see back-to-back high-level productivity seasons from someone who does have a pretty high RAS. He's not like 84-inch wingspan with 34-inch arms. He kind of has a unique build in that regard, that he NFL size, but shorter arms. But the testing was good enough, coupled with the production over multiple years, where I think he is a hit the ground running, high floor, maybe not crazy high upside, again, because of the age and because he's not a freaky athlete, but he feels like one of the cleanest prospects, regardless of position, in this entire draft.
And I think that when it comes to Brian Flores types players, which we'll get to another one from UCLA that dropped by the Vikings as well in a second, but technicians and high intelligence players, guys who really appreciate the craft of football rather than just physical freaks, in my mind, those fit with what Brian Flores is. And you might say, well, every coach is going to want guys who produce like crazy and know all the pass rush moves and are committed and everything else. But Flores generally asks a lot of his guys. And that doesn't just mean dropping back in coverage or blitzing, but also technique wise. I think this is why he liked DJ Wanham, that he would ask for different rush lanes to be taken care of. And he would ask for different types of rushes where sometimes you're rushing and then kind of faking it and dropping back. And sometimes on the outside, sometimes on the inside, sometimes you're moving positions. And I think someone who is like Latu, who has produced a ton and seems to really care about it. To me, that if you have all those different pass rush moves and techniques, that shows how much you want to be good at this. Mm-hmm. And I also feel like, tell me what you think of this. Production in Danielle Hunter's case didn't matter. In almost everybody else's case, it does. And it doesn't guarantee that you will be a massive sack artist, but it certainly is convincing to me when someone is racking up 12 sacks in a college season and has, like you said, the relative athletic score is RAS, has the athletic baseline to be able to get there. I have liked him as an idea for number 23 if they end up having that pick.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess how I do it with my evaluations is Danielle Hunter was so freaky athletic. The production wasn't there, but you say, well, that can be coached up, and tapping into that size, length, athleticism, that's where you're okay picking a Danielle Hunter on day 2 and saying, hey, like, let's just see what we can do. If you're Latu, who is a good athlete, he's not Danielle Hunter-esque, he's not TJ Watt around the corner or Myles Garrett, then you do need to see the refinement and the productivity. So it's really kind of like a give and take, that you pick a flyer in the 7th round who looks like Danielle Hunter, but could never get to the quarterback, because you hope that your Brian Flores or your defensive line coach can really tap into that athleticism. So if you are someone like Latu, you don't have the crazy long wingspan that can get into the chest of offensive tackles. You want to be able to use your hands like a karate master, and that's what he does. So that's where someone that produced for many years, like you're saying, you feel good about it because it's like he understands his athletic limitations, or maybe length limitations, and that he's not crazy powerful. He's just like one of the most slippery rushers in the entire draft, and he has legitimate NFL defensive end size.
All right, the next guy on my list that came to visit the Minnesota Vikings is Quinyon Mitchell, and cornerback. So really, the Vikings have a lack of difference-making talent on defense. I think Jonathan Grenard can be that. Ivan Pace to an extent. Cam Bynum to an extent. Josh Metellus probably can be that into another season and beyond. But they don't have a shutdown, lockdown. Hate to see this guy. Here comes the best receivers in the league. He's going to be over on their side for most of the day. They have not had that since Xavier Rhodes. They've also not had a good defense, a really good defense, since Xavier Rhodes either. And if you're checking off the boxes of, all right, here's what we need to build a number 1 defense, not just a okay, good enough, whatever. I mean, like an elite defense. That guy is an absolute requirement. Quinyon Mitchell appears to have the goods to potentially be that. Where is his draft stock though? I mean, this is Toledo Rockets, right? Is that where he comes from? I mean, that's the MAC. So there will be maybe some questions about the competition that he played against. Tremendous athlete. Is his ceiling in this draft like one of the first defensive players, or is he more of a back of the first and you know what I mean? Back end of the first round guy?
It's really hard to peg because of what you just pointed out, that I think there will be teams that will say, okay, 45 pass breakups the last 3 seasons, 6 interceptions, but in the MAC. And now to me, and I feel like I say this every draft season, so I'm glad I'm getting it out with him. I, of course, am not a box score scout, but I have a rule. Cornerbacks that have a ton of pass breakups, they're doing something right. They're either freaky athletes or they have insane instincts. The zone awareness is amazing. Whatever it is, I think, a very big challenge to find a cornerback that has 45 pass breakups in 3 seasons and is just like a terrible prospect. And that's what Quinyon Mitchell had. I don't care if it's in the MAC, Pac-12, SEC, ACC. And then, by the way, 6 foot, 190 plus pounds, 31-inch arms, which 10 years ago would be on the smaller side. But I think today with the Tank Dells and the Jordan Addisons, that's actually like a pretty big corner to play on the outside. 4.33 speed. Now, I don't think he plays quite to that level of speed on the field, but was super sticky in coverage. And even when there were times where, even in the MAC, he wouldn't be right in the hip pocket of the wide receiver, his recovery speed, his instincts, his length always showed up. And it was like, I went in knowing the statistics. I was like, let's see, was this just a bunch of easy pass breakups? There was a lot of times where I'm like, oh, he got beat there. Wow, he still made that pass breakup. Like, how did he recover that quickly? I think zone, man, press bail, any type of coverage that Brian Flores wanted to throw at a defense, Quinyon Mitchell, I think, would be ready to do that. I'm not going to say he's quite Xavier Rhodes because he was a little bigger and was like a true, like, ridiculous freak, but there is that type of ability to stay relatively close to any size wide receiver. And he almost knows, like, all right, if I'm just right here about a quarter of a yard behind this guy, I can still get my left arm in there and break up the pass or just find the football and pick it off. So he's my cornerback 1 in this class. There's other guys from bigger schools. Nate Wiggins from Clemson, obviously Terry and Arnold from Alabama, Kool-Aid McKinstry. Feels like we might be talking about a Toledo Rocket actually being the first corner off the board because he checks all the boxes despite or beyond just where he played in college.
It seemed to me that last year it was hard for the Vikings to play a lot of man because they just didn't have the dudes. And I think
He's
about
a man guy, yeah.
Yeah, the limitations that Brian Flores had to work under, the restrictions roster-wise, and what he got out of it. The idea of having someone who you can actually play man on a really great receiver is exciting to think about what different tweaks he could make to that defense already if he had someone like Quinyon Mitchell and he lived up to what his draft type is. But I agree with you that similar to the other statistics, we're talking about sacks, we're talking about, with receivers, receptions, quarterbacks, yards passing, it's not always a 1-to-1. Sometimes guys don't have a ton of pass breakups and become great, but for the most part, they usually do. And if I have to be told, of which I have been numerous times in draft picks of the recent past, well, you see, they didn't throw at him that often. Like, it's college football, man. Not only are the quarterbacks not good enough to not know who to throw to, but they throw all the time. Like, they're throwing hundreds and hundreds of passes, unless you're JJ McCarthy. Had to fit that in. But they're throwing hundreds of passes. It's sometimes bad, sometimes good competition. It's not always the best receivers. You should make some plays on the ball. And we've seen really from a Caleb Evans, his athleticism is great, but I think he had 0 interceptions like his whole college career. So some's a little bit off there, and it has been in the NFL. So I think that is a major factor for Quinyon Mitchell.
Yeah, one last point. In watching his film, I was like, why are these quarterbacks continuing to throw in his direction? There was a couple games where he had 3 or 4 or 5 pass breakups, and it was like on a slant, deep down the sideline, on a post, on a dig, on a comeback. And it was like he truly was showing his ability to make plays, not just a burner with the 4.33 speed. He, to me, if he was at a different school, maybe the production wouldn't be quite as gaudy, but everything that you want out of today's cornerback on the outside, physicality at the line is there too. And definitely if you're saying maybe the Vikings want and didn't have the dudes to play man, Quinyon Mitchell, I mean, again, it was the MAC. It'll be different against, the Packers receivers, of course, but he is unafraid to play in the face and play man coverage down the football field.
All right, one more guy we want to get to that visit the Vikings that both you and I are super intrigued by, and I don't know when he's going to be picked because he does not appear to me as a super high ceiling guy, but is it insane to think that Gabriel Murphy of the UCLA Bruins could be like a 4th round guy that they look at, or maybe if they were to trade some of the later stuff to get into the 3rd round. But this is somebody who moved all over the place and had very good production. It caught my eye when I was looking at his PFF data, just when they brought him in, like, oh, this is somebody that actually moved around quite a bit. And he's not thought of as a physical freak, but look at some of the guys that Brian Flores has worked well with. Ivan Pace Jr., is that a physical freak to you? Doesn't look like one to me. And they just signed Andrew Van Ginkel, another guy who's like physically impressive, but I wouldn't say he's Myles Garrett. Yet his intelligence, his movability, he was a 5th round pick who Brian Flores turned into a very good player. So I kind of see shades of that in Gabriel Murphy.
Yeah, he's really fun. And whoever the defensive line and defensive coordinator was at UCLA, which I don't know, off the top of my head. Did a great job with Latu, with Gabriel Murphy, and even his twin brother, Grayson Murphy, who could be a day 3 pick. I looked back before we started at just what my scouting report, just anything that stood out from the Gabriel Murphy scouting report. And I wrote, and then I certainly love everything that Latu does. I wrote, he may have the best arsenal of pass rushing moves in the entire class. Latu is amazing with his swim move. Blockers try to get into his chest, and he just uses that J.J. Watt, arm over repeatedly, and then he'll throw in a swipe, then a bull rush. Gabriel Murphy, will literally throw 5 different pass rush moves in one drive on a guard. Then he'll be moved outside to tackle, then blitzing up the middle against the center. It's almost like he had a different move depending on where he was aligned. Super slippery, can get skinny through gaps, even though he is a little bit smaller. And like you're saying, he probably is not going to go super early because he's kind of the size of an off-ball linebacker, a little bigger, in the 240 range, but short arms, 75-inch wingspan. He's not someone that's going to win literally on his physicality or athleticism alone. But like you mentioned earlier with Latu, at his size, he hits the kind of, I don't want to say bottom floor, but he hits the standard of, all right, he's not a low-level athlete who ran 4.9 and has a 25-inch vertical. He kind of exudes smoothness on the football field. He's not super explosive, but in terms of situational pass rushing, and we know how aggressive Brian Flores is, he's someone that you would like to pluck off the sideline and go, oh, it's second and long. You're going to rush up the A-gap, and that is famous. Brian Flores loves, Ivan Pace was so good there. And then on 3rd and 7, you're going to be outside of Andrew Van Ginkel here, and then on the next down, we're going to keep you on the field on 1st and 10, and you're going to rush right next to Jonathan Grenard. And that's really where Gabriel Murphy was used, and production through the roof. I mean, not a ton of sacks, but you watch the Latu film, and you're like, who's this smaller guy? I think his number was 12. He is in the backfield a lot because of, again, the finesse part of his game, which I do think gets lost in the NFL. That it's actually, for as good as J.J. Watt and Aaron Donald were and how strong and physical freaks they were finesse players at times where blockers just could not get their hands on him because they were so good in the pass rush move department. That's kind of how I feel about Gabriel Murphy. Feels like that kind of mid-round pick who can outplay his draft position.
So if you're wondering who are these fellas who are visiting the Minnesota Vikings, well, there's your breakdown of those fellas. But 22 minutes is way too long to go without talking quarterbacks. So I'm sure the Vikings will have more players in, and next week we could take a look at some of those. Also, next week we'll have a Kwesi Adofo-Mensah press conference to break down as well that we're going to get later on this week as the pre-draft presser, where he reveals all their plans, I'm sure. It's always a fun sport, that pre-draft press conference, to try to get any information that we can out of the general manager. But let's get to a quarterback subject, which Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated reported something that really caught my ear. He was on the Rich Eisen show, and Breer said that scouts are not very high on Michael Penix, but coaches are high on Michael Penix. So he said that as he was talking to coaches during the season, what are you seeing from this guy, that they would rave about him. But then when he would ask NFL scouts that he knows over the years, hey, what do you think? They would say, maybe he's a 2nd round pick or something like that. What do you think is the gap there between what coaches are working with and what scouts are looking at with Michael Penix Jr.?
Okay, here's my theory on that. And we kind of talked about this previously about, I've mentioned Bo Nix, that I feel like he's kind of an extension of the offensive coordinator on the field. And we haven't really heard any Bo Nix buzz lately. Maybe that's going to kind of start up the last 2 weeks leading into the draft. But it's the same idea. It's the fact that I think coaches, what does an offensive coach want? They want their quarterback to get the ball out of their hands quickly, not take a lot of sacks, play within the structure, distribute the football kind of evenly to all different receivers so defenses can't zero in on one wide receiver or a tight end. And that is really the book if you're looking at strengths for Michael Penix. Low sack rate. You can watch and see, hey, this is a Rome Odunze game. This is a Jalen Polk game. This is a Jalen McMillan game. He did such a good job really being that point guard. So, and it kind of hits home with me because as a scout, I'll say, I'm not crazy high on Michael Penix because the improvisation isn't really there. We know he's not a superb athlete. And even if he, tested well at the Washington Pro Day. That's not really his game. But it makes perfect sense that as the coaches, get off the playoffs and they're really focused on free agency, and then they're like, all right, let's get caught up with the draft here. Who do we got? And they're like, oh my God, this guy just does everything that I want from him. I mean, yeah, there's some misses here and there. And I think coaches understand that how big improvisation is today at the quarterback spot, but I think scouts are more looking for upside, and I kind of gravitate in that direction too, not just for quarterback, but coaches want, hey, this guy is going to come in and be a Latu and be great with his hands and get the ball out. If you're a quarterback, make good decisions. And I think that's why there's kind of a disconnect. And by the way, for me, this screams Las Vegas Raiders to me. I think Antonio Pierce is kind of the guy there. Nothing against Tom Telesco, but he's a retread GM. He didn't hire Antonio Pierce. It was kind of this galvanized team down the stretch. They win in Arrowhead on Christmas. Kind of feels like, I don't want to say because I'm not sure if like he's the one making the final call, but it feels like the Raiders could be that team where like Antonio Pierce and his coaching staff like love Michael Penix, and Tom Telesco's like, I'm kind of looking for a Justin Herbert type player. Certainly the arm strength is close, but that's just the team that I thought of right away that maybe could be either giving Breer that information or just a team that makes sense to have that disconnect between the scouts and the coaches.
I could totally see it, because if, like what you're talking about, scouts should be trying to think about how a player can grow and what they can become. So when you look at someone who's 21 years old and maybe has raw tools, and you go, oh, over the next couple of years, this is like the JJ McCarthy thing. Over the next couple of years, you could develop that arm and make him better. You can develop, use his mind, and you can see where he's kind of ticking, and he's a winner and he's got a big heart and all that stuff. So I guess you could see that. But as from a coaching perspective, if you are drawing up an offense, what you understand, if you're Kevin O'Connell, is that throwing with anticipation is A, unbelievably difficult, and B, impossible to teach someone how to do. So if you're Kevin O'Connell and you're going, all right, so his feet get messy on these slant routes. Okay, we'll work on that. We'll do that 100 times off to the side. We'll figure out how to get it, or we'll just not use that route as much or something else. But when I send Justin Jefferson on a double move 25 yards down the field, and I need him to be breaking as Michael Penix is pulling the trigger, as actually Kirk Cousins was extremely good at this, and probably the reason why Kirk Cousins became a top 10-ish quarterback in the league is because someone could be heading across the field and he could throw it to a spot way the heck over there. And you're like, on tape, you go, wait, where's he even aiming? And then, okay, now I see the receiver come into the picture and make the play. You see that all over Michael Penix's tape. You see it all over Kirk Cousins. You see it. I mean, the great quarterbacks in the league don't have to see it come open before they throw the ball. I even think that this is one of the reasons someone like Brock Purdy can be not special and yet still succeed in the NFL, is throwing with anticipation. That's part of it. Also, throwing it that hard, you think about the windows you have to throw into. And I kind of made fun of the like grit or big heart or whatever. But if you're a coach and you see a guy take a program that's mediocre to a championship game and fight through the injuries he fought through his career, lead the way he did, handle all the things of that offense the way he did. See, this is why I think I gravitate to Michael Penix. I spend most of my career talking to players and coaches and not so much scouts. And I take away things from them. And I look at Penix differently than you do. I like him a lot more than you do. And I like him as a potential fit at number 11 for the Vikings. Now, let me tie these two subjects together, Chris, what we talked about first and then now. So we got all these players coming to visit the Vikings. We got coaches that like Michael Penix. The coach of the Vikings is really making this decision, and I don't think anybody else, for the Vikings. Are you feeling me with an 11-23 Michael Penix and Byron Murphy, Latu, Quinyon Mitchell? Maybe? Am I onto something? Could this work?
Yes, for sure. Because we definitely aren't on this exact same page in terms of where we would, kind of stack Michael Penix in this draft. But that has been I don't know what the term is, like the draft scenarios that you have to kind of pit against each other if you're the Vikings. Is it trade the farm for JJ McCarthy and hope that the scouts are right and that you can develop? Or is it just go with high floor with Michael Penix, and by the way, you also get a Latu or Quinyon Mitchell or whatever top tier prospect, probably on defense, is there at 23. And I think for as much as I'm an advocate for trading up for a quarterback, that doesn't mean that I think every team has to do it. And I don't think there is such a sizable gap between JJ McCarthy and Michael Penix where I would say, oh, go with the former. Definitely pick JJ McCarthy, trade 11 and 23, maybe even a mid-round pick next year. Get him. Don't even think about Michael Penix. I think they're relatively close, and you have to kind of pit those two together. And yes, I think even though I'm not as high on Penix, I would go with the Penix plus elite defensive or borderline elite, very good defensive prospect in the first round as opposed to trading the farm for JJ McCarthy.
I am completely prepared, by the way, for Michael Penix to be taken in the third round and JJ McCarthy to be taken 4th or 5th overall as the Vikings trade everything for him. And then Kevin O'Connell tells me all about the things that I didn't see with JJ McCarthy in the press conference or whatever. I am prepared for that outcome, but until that happens, I will die on the hill of Michael Penix. I like a lot about his game, and I think if they did it, it would make a lot of sense with how Kevin O'Connell operates. There is another rumor, though, that directs us back into the top 3 with the Vikings, and this comes via Todd McShay on Ryan Russillo's show, where he talked about a scenario where, and follow along, everybody, it gets a little convoluted, the Vikings trade up with the Patriots. So the Patriots go back to 11 and get 23. Then the Patriots trade back up to 4 with the Arizona Cardinals. So the Patriots are still in position to draft JJ McCarthy, and the Vikings are in position to draft Drake May or Jaden Daniels. There's a lot going on there. And what basically Todd McShay was saying is, yeah, there's a lot going on with all the discussions among the top potential drafting teams. And of course, the Vikings, I think we pretty clearly know, are trying to trade up, and whether they pull it off, we'll see. So what do you think about a trade up for the Vikings, then Patriots trade back, then Patriots trade back up?
Well, we saw it happen last year with what the Houston Texans did with CJ Stroud and Will Anderson, and then the Arizona Cardinals, which would be the team involved at number 4, they traded out. They let the Houston Texans pick Will Anderson, who won Defensive Player of the Year. Then they traded back up to pick Paris Johnson, the offensive tackle from Ohio State. So it seems weird, and I'm sure there's been other instances in draft history, but it's kind of a new thing. We haven't seen it recently. Now, from a Vikings angle, I just said, like, you could maybe talk me into Michael Penix and defensive player over JJ McCarthy, trading their farm to get him. I would be okay with that. If you're trading up for 3 to get Drake May, I'm going Drake May. Like, I am a Drake May dude. I think he is very close to Caleb Williams. That's one where one quarterback plus future picks plus 23 outweighs value-wise, just going we're going to just try to get the lesser quarterback and get a good defensive player. To me, May is significantly, or I don't want to say significantly, but way ahead of JJ McCarthy on my board in my evaluation. So that situation, it would be fun to see all those trades early on. But to me, I mean, I don't know if Todd said who he was thinking the Vikings would pick, but at 3, I feel like Drake May would be more on the board than JJ McCarthy, right?
Yes, I would say so.
Okay.
Or, I mean, we don't know. Like, they could love Jaden Daniels more than we think. That could be the one that we're surprised by, that we didn't see necessarily as being the best fit. But, I mean, when you look at the production, the deep passing, the running ability, if you want somebody who won't check down on 4th and 8, there's your guy. He might get sacked and lose 23 yards, but he also might run for a 40-yard touchdown if it's Jaden Daniels. And we're going to dive into that a little bit more next week. We're going to look at some Jaden Daniels and Michael Penix and their best games, similarly to what we did last week with JJ McCarthy and Drake and Drakeus, by the way. I was
Drakeus, I love it.
On Twitter today, I saw, I think it was JP Acosta put out a screen grab of the North Carolina offense, and it's just receivers nowhere close to open, somebody breaking through the offensive line. And I was reminded of how we called this offense a clown show. And I was like, yep, there it is. That's what it looked like for Drake May. Because I've had people ask what I think about JT O'Sullivan, friend of the show, who ranked Drake May 4th on his quarterback rankings. And my thought is there's a reason why JT does an explanation in the beginning, because he's basing it off of what he watched in the 2023 tape. And it's not always great. And sometimes it is great, but sometimes it's pretty messy for Drake May. I would still be completely comfortable with the Vikings doing something like this. And whatever the Patriots do after that, I don't care. I do think it is realistic, though, with this trading back and then trading up for the Patriots to pull off. So I wouldn't be surprised if something like that is their plan, so they could kind of have their cake and eat it too. Now, I want to end the show, Chris, by playing a little game that I thought of today as I was on a plane back from visiting my in-laws. I want to call it, What's This Team Thinking? What's this team thinking? And because I was trying to put myself in the minds of other teams around the Vikings, we're just talking about the Patriots and so forth. Like, what are their approach? What are they saying over there? And the two teams I came up with that could be maybe a thorn in the Vikings side, and I want your opinion on what them teams are thinking, is the New York Giants and Denver Broncos. The Giants, to me, I just have never bought in fully to the idea that they're going after a quarterback. I think they want to give one more shot to that Daniel Jones thing working. They already brought in a backup quarterback in Drew Lock, and they need everything on their roster. Their roster is barely over UFL level, and they need lots of pieces around whoever they have at quarterback. That's my sense on the Giants, is that teams are using the Giants to be like, we'll trade up with the Giants. They want a quarterback, I bet. Wink, wink, wink. And Denver keeps getting connected to Bo Nix. Everybody who covers Denver thinks that Sean Payton loves Bo Nix. So tell me, what do you think these two teams are thinking?
Well, I think you laid it out pretty good, and it's been so fascinating to me that the Giants, given their situation, and I kind of smirked when you mentioned that they want to give, that you think they want to give Daniel Jones one more shot, which I feel like at this point we know who he is, that they're at 6. And in any other draft that I can remember, it feels like, oh, you're at 6, you need a quarterback? You can just probably get one at 6, or you can trade up into the top 3 and get your guy. It's like rare to see in any mock draft, or even anyone that's super plugged in, sending a quarterback to the Giants. It's either the team just leapfrog them, and they have like 4 picks in the top 105. Like, they could move up. It's just been so weird to me, because I feel like, and I don't want to say that I know these guys very well, but like Joe Shane, their GM, and Brian Daboll were in Buffalo as Josh Allen blossomed. So for them to be going into their 3rd years with the Giants, and like you mentioned, the roster is not good. To me, you're in New York, and it went from, oh my God, beating the Vikings in the playoffs to, oh man, actually that was really fluky, and they probably were not really that good at all. If they start this season and it's just Daniel Jones having a 3 turnover game and then a 4 turnover game and then 1 good game and then 3 bad games, like they're like, I think Shane and Brian Daboll will both be on the hot seat, and they'll probably be like, man, we probably should have tried a little harder at the quarterback spot. Like, it's just weird to me. So I'm actually going to go other side of it. I feel like maybe they're trying to just lay low and be like, we actually love these quarterbacks, but we're not going to make it super known. And we'll trade you next year's first, whatever it takes to get up to 3 or to 4. We only have to move a little bit to get that quarterback. And it's funny that you mentioned Broncos and Giants together. I kind of feel like they're in the same boat, that the Broncos don't have as much ammo, but their GM, George Payton, who a lot of your listeners and viewers know very well from his time in Minnesota, never afraid to make the splashy signing at the quarterback spot, did that with Russell Wilson, and it didn't work out. It was one of the worst trades in NFL history. They're paying for that now. Sean Payton, I would assume, is going into draft meetings and being like, guys, can you give me a quarterback here? Like, can you give me someone that can operate? A lot of what we talked about with Michael Penix, what I mentioned with Bo Nix. The problem is they have pick 12 and pick 76. They don't have a second-round selection. Would they, too, be okay with, hey, we'll trade you the next 2 years of first-round picks? we got to get ahead of the Vikings. We got to get ahead of maybe the Giants. We got to move up there. It just seems, I will be shocked if both of those teams are just like, yeah, we're going to sit this one out. And maybe if Bo Nix falls to us in the second or third round, well, that's cool. Like, what will the Broncos do? Like, I don't even know who their quarterback is right now. So those are two teams that I think are suspiciously not really mentioned a lot in the trade-up talks. Maybe it makes a little bit more sense with Denver because they don't have the ammunition. But if they both just stay put and let the Vikings just jump in front of them or a bunch of other teams pick these quarterbacks, I will actually be pretty surprised given where these GMs and these head coaches are kind of in their timelines in their respective cities.
So here's my thought when it comes to Daniel Jones and the Giants. And again, could be completely wrong. This is my theory. I'm trying to put myself inside Brian Daboll and what is his name? Joe Schoen. Their shoes. Okay. So you extend Daniel Jones and it blows up in your face immediately. If you draft another quarterback, then if I'm the owner, I'm calling up and I'm going, hey, why did you guys do that if you wanted to draft another quarterback? Like, do you know what you're doing with quarterbacks? Another thing is, think about Matt Nagy, Mitch Trubisky. So they draft Mitch Trubisky. It doesn't work out. And his answer to try to keep his job is to draft Justin Fields. Somebody else got to develop Justin Fields. Not particularly well, but somebody else ended up with inheriting him, which usually is what happens. If you try to draft a quarterback to then go to ownership and say, hey, just give me time. We drafted our guy. 2 years from now, he's going to be great. If you're already several years into this and you've already hitched your wagon to somebody else in Daniel Jones, and you've already said, no, yeah, he's worth $40 million a year, you are not going to look real great, I think, to your owner when you then have to go back and say, let's do it again. More likely than not, in my mind, they're looking at trying to get Joe Alt, or they're to say, oh, well, it wasn't Daniel Jones' fault. It was the offensive line, which actually there is truth to that, a lot of truth. And it wasn't his fault, or they could be looking at Malik Neighbors. We need a receiver because no one was open for DJ. That's been the problem. And they're going to try to run it back. So I'm thinking that they need this year to be in the playoffs or right in the mix to save their jobs. Then they can think about what happens after Daniel Jones. As far as Denver goes, what everyone seems to connect with Sean Payton and Bo Nix is that he gets the ball out quickly. And that, here's Sean Payton who works with Drew Brees, and you plug in the offense into Drew Brees' amazing bot brain, and then he throws it accurately where you tell him to throw it. This is what Sean Payton wants. He doesn't want scrambling Russell Wilson. He doesn't care as much about physical freak tools. He cares more about, can you get the ball out and to the place that you're supposed to get it? Now, I have no idea if this is what Sean Payton is actually thinking, but it does make sense to me that if there's somebody past the first wave and they can't trade up and they don't have enough ammo, especially since they sent, I think, a second round pick to get Sean Payton, that Bo Nix and the Broncos, they fit together because of his playing style.
Yeah, and I think that kind of just works out because what I mentioned earlier, that they have picks 12 and 76, and they may just be like, look, we don't have the ammo to do it. And like you mentioned, there is that, I don't want to call it galaxy brain, but there's that next level of like, hey, if I'm the GM, I have to think, how will this look? How will this reflect on my decision-making to ownership? And if we trade up again and we're mortgaging the future again, we're already paying Russell Wilson a big dead cap hit, and we trade up for another quarterback that may not be, a instant success in the NFL, that maybe they're just like, hey, you know what? We will kind of gladly take Bo Nix. Maybe we have to trade up from 76 into the second round to get him, but it won't be as costly as doing so into the first round. So yeah, all that makes sense too, but I will just be surprised if we don't see either of those teams relatively interested or making somewhat of an effort to get one of the top tier quarterbacks. But then again, maybe you're right. Maybe they're just like, let's just kind of keep the status quo and see if we can get the best out of it. So it's not like the next head coach or GM is ultimately the ones developing these quarterbacks next season.
CBS Sports draft analyst Chris Trapasso. It's just a good time to be alive, isn't it, Chris? We are
It is.
closing in. We got 2 more shows before the actual NFL draft. And then one of my favorites of the year when you break down every Vikings pick in the following week's show. So really just 3 more weeks for us. We're going to look at Jaden Daniels next week, along with Michael Penix a little closer, go back and look at their best games, along with talking about whatever rumors and visits that we have. But we're getting close, man. And talk about favorite shows of the year when we do our final mock, which will be the Tuesday before the draft. So I'm
when
excited.
You hit Jordan
man.
Addison last year.
I did.
That's when you hit Jordan Addison. We got to remind people. I think I reminded at the start of this draft show in January that you hit on Jordan Addison. I don't know if that was inside info or just your huge brain, your huge Vikings brain, just knowing what they probably would do. So we definitely have to do that. And it is my favorite show. For as much as it's so fun talking about and speculating rumors, prospect evaluations, this episode, we kind of got a good mix of that, I felt. Afterward, being like, all right, here's where I had these guys graded. I can't change anything. Here's my evaluation. You tell me about the fit. Does it make sense? Does Ed Ingram make sense? Does he not? Things like that. I love that draft show immediately following the draft.
Well, it should be very good, man. Thanks for your conversation and assistance in helping me understand these guys that were visiting the Vikings today, as always. And thank you all for listening/watching. And we're getting close, folks. We're getting close.
Yes. Football.